Good. I finally have my new filters. Okay, my microphone is muted. Good.
She shared her.
They.
O'clock. I'm mute. I can talk to everybody. Are we ready?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm sure more will arrive as we get going, so we'll stall a little bit at the front end. Before I say anything more, can someone online confirm that you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So yes, we have folks participating in person and online, and thank you all for being here. So my name is Alex Weinhagen. I'm one member of the 5-member Land Use Review Board. We are the board that oversees the Act 250 program. This is Kirsten Sultan, who is another of the 5 board members here tonight, and from the Kingdom. You have to bring local support when a Chittenden County boy like me tries to come up here. So the other 3 members of the board are Janet Hurley, who lives in Southern Vermont. She's our chair. Brooke Dingledine, Central Vermont, and Sarah Had, who lives in Franklin County. So I'll tell you a little bit about me before we dive into the slideshow. But let me just address the agenda, and then I can take it off the screen. There were some for those that are in the room to grab if you want something to write on. We're going to start with a presentation so I can explain to you what it is that we've been working on. And I'll try to get through that as quickly as I can so that we can have the bulk of this time to take questions and get clarifications. And if you have actual suggestions on the draft rules, we'll have to take those too. But we've done 2 of these so far, and most of the session has been about folks just trying to understand and getting questions answered. So presentation, then we'll have questions and comments, and 8 o'clock is our hard stop. So even if we're still going, we're going to end at 8, and there'll be more opportunities for folks if there were comments that we didn't get to. So again, I'm Alex. I grew up here in Vermont, but as I said, I grew up in Essex Junction in Chittenden County. My academic training is actually in wildlife biology. I'm supposed to be chasing after critters. In fact, I did my graduate work up here in the kingdom, chasing after the blackback woodpecker, which is a rare species that is associated with boreal forests, which the kingdom has some of. But after a little bit of a stint in Michigan, I came back home to Vermont and shifted gears, mostly because the only way to break into Vermont Fish and Wildlife was to wait for someone to die, and nobody was dying at that moment, so there were no positions available. So I got into community planning, and what I've done for most of my career is work at the municipal level. So I worked as a planner for the town of Heinsberg, which is in southern Chittenden County, and help them figure out what they want to be when they grow up. They haven't grown up yet, but they're getting there. I was in Heinsberg for about 22 years before the Act 250 reform effort happened, and this new board was created, and thought that this would be an interesting change of pace to talk to folks at the statewide level and bring some of those lessons from local government along the way. So that's a little bit about who I am. I live in Burlington. Kirsten, do you want to tell a little bit about who you are?
Sure. So for anyone who, most of you, maybe some of you know me a little bit. I, until recently, have been in the role of the Act 250 coordinator assigned to the Northeast Kingdom region. And I feel like I'd be remiss if I don't mention that position is now held by Kevin Anderson, who's with us. And that is based in St. Johnsbury. I've been living in Linden for the last 20 years. I was raised all over Canada, but always had really strong connection to Vermont, and I've been living here for about 40 years. I'm a dual Canadian American citizen, so Canada has a very, fond place in my heart, and I, appreciate that aspect of being up here in Newport. So thanks for taking the time to come. We really do want to hear from you, so thank you.
Yeah, the other board members, we're sort of dividing this up so that there are 2 of us at all of these tier 3 meetings. The other board members, there are 2 other planners, kind of like me. It's sort of a planner heavy board. Janet Hurley, our chair, most recently worked for the Bennington Regional Planning Commission, so in Southern Vermont, and at the regional planning level, she also has municipal planning experience. She's actually the reason I came into planning, but I'll tell you that story some other time. Sarah Hadd is former town administrator for the town of Fairfax, and prior to that served as a town planner in Colchester for about 20 years. Brooke Dingeldine lives in central Vermont. Randolph, right, Kirsten?
Mm-hmm.
And Brooke was actually a practicing attorney and represented clients in front of courts with regard to Act 250 appeals as well as other facets of the law. So that's the 5 of us. The governor appointed us at the beginning of the year. So we're, with the exception of Kirsten, who's been with the program for a good long time, the rest of us are relatively new to the Act 250 program.
Yeah,
So
can I just add really quickly too? I feel like maybe I didn't mention this. I'm a civil engineer by training. I was in consulting for 18 years and I have my own business for 4 years. So I'd been sort of on the applicant side of things and, bring that understanding of what that means to be an applicant, to this role in Act 250.
So we have enough people that we can't go around the room and do introductions because it'll take the rest of the meeting. So I think I've stalled long enough. Most people who are going to be here are here online and in person. So I'm gonna jump into the presentation. So hold on. So the reason you're all here tonight, and thanks again for being here, is that our land use review board is going around the state last week and this week to start to get public input and do public engagement on tier 3 rulemaking, and I'll explain what that is. But we are doing 4 listening sessions around the state. We've been to Morrisville and Rutland. This is our 3rd, and tomorrow we'll be down in Windsor. So, got to start with the overview of what Act 250 is, right? So, Act 250 is the state's land use development law. And so, most land use regulation and permitting happens at the municipal level in Vermont. But about 55 years ago, the state created the state level development review system that runs in parallel with what happens at the municipal level. And frankly, 55 years ago, there wasn't much in the way of municipal review at that time, which was part of the impetus for Act 250. The purpose of it is outlined here on the slide. It was tweaked a bit just a couple of years ago when the reform effort happened to sort of recognize the different facets of the program. But ultimately, it's designed to review development projects and make sure they're in harmony with the surroundings that they're proposed in. Overall, Act 250 is trying to accomplish 2 things at the same time. It's trying to make sure that we're facilitating economic development and growth while making sure that the natural landscape is respected when that's happening. Vermont, as we all know, is not the Rust Belt of Ohio. It's not Southern Rhode Island, where I went to college. It's not Massachusetts, right? Our landscape is different, and Act 250 was created in part to recognize that this is a different sort of place, and it deserves some consideration as we move development forward. So I imagine many of you are somewhat familiar with the Act 250 process, so I'm just going to give a thumbnail sketch. We can take questions afterwards if you're curious about the details. It is a citizen-based review process, but it is one that functions at different levels. Most people think of it as a process where someone fills out an application. Maybe they're going to build a 12-unit housing development. Maybe it's a subdivision with 12 lots, a house on each one. And they think, okay, there's going to be an application. I'm going to have a public hearing. My neighbors are going to come and grill. And there's a board that's going to make a decision. That is what Act 250 review looks like, but only for the very smallest segment of projects. Most projects are deemed minor. They never go to a public hearing. And instead of our staff sort of drafting issues for a board to consider in a public hearing, our staff drafts an approval based on the application and notifies interested parties around that project to say, we're going to approve this project. We feel like this is a minor Act 250 project. We're going to approve it. Here's our draft approval. If you feel aggrieved in some way, let us know and we will schedule a hearing. So that's the minor process. Most projects are actually reviewed that way. The major process involves the more traditional setting that would also happen at a municipal level, where there's a warned public hearing and everyone has a chance to come and say their piece. But there are also some applications that are simply approved administratively by staff without even going in front of our district commissions. Act 250 is a distributed review process. The board that Kirsten and I serve on, we do not review development projects at all. It is the 9 district commissions around the state that actually review applications in coordination with our district coordinator staff. So those district commissioners are volunteers. They're appointed by the governor for a particular term. And their job is to serve very much, at least in my mind, like a municipal development review board member or planning commissioner to sort of sit and hear an application, take questions, and then ruminate on that and issue decisions. And so that's the structure of Act 250. It's a distributed regional level review process that happens with our district commissions and supporting staff. It is a comprehensive review program. So unlike some of the specific permits that you might need to get for development from the Agency of Natural Resources, like I need a permit for my new septic system, I need a permit for V-Trans to have an access to a state highway. Act 250 goes well beyond that to incorporate lots of different criteria. It is a comprehensive review. So in addition to making sure that the wastewater system is going to function, that the road is not going to wash out the neighbor's driveway when a big storm happens, we also have criteria that look at the impact on local schools. Is a project going to overwhelm the ability for that school to function? We look at traffic impacts regionally and how the traffic impact studies will tell us what that project will do in a particular area. We look at the compatibility with the municipality's plan to make sure that it's in keeping with that. So it's a comprehensive review. We use 10 basic criteria. There's lots of sub-criteria within those to help guide that review. For a long time, Act 250 jurisdiction, like who needs a permit, was based on how big the project was. And from its inception, Act 250 was designed to be a program that reviewed larger developments. Smaller projects, you want to build a garage, you want to build one single house, you want to put up a dog house, an addition. Those were meant to be handled at the municipal level. Act 250 was reserved for the larger projects. And as you can see on the slide, that jurisdictional limit varies depending on whether the municipality that the project is in has zoning or not. But typically we're talking 10 or more housing units, 6 to 10 or more lots if it's a subdivision, and commercial development depending on the size of the parcel. Also, most development above 2,500 feet in those most sensitive high elevation areas. So that's Act 250 jurisdiction, largely as we've known it for 50 years with some tweaks.
Can I add
Hold that thought. So in 2 years ago, in 2024, year and a half, the legislature enacted Act 181, which was a major reform to the Act 250 program. And it was years in the making. It was easily 8 to 9 years. There was a commission on Act 250 that was created by the legislature 8 or 9 years ago. They made recommendations, and then the legislature worked really hard and made very little progress for many of those years. And in 2024, they were able to enact this major reform effort. That reform effort created this board that Kirsten and I sit on and eliminated the old Natural Resources Board and instituted this 5-member professional full-time board. And most importantly for tonight's conversation, it starts to change what types of development require an Act 250 permit. And it does that in 2 ways, both of them sort of related to your location. The first was that it creates a road construction jurisdictional provision that says, if you are building more than 800 feet of new road, that project is going to need an Act 250 permit. Or if it's more than 2,000 feet of new road and new associated driveway combined, again, that will need an Act 250 permit. So that was one major jurisdictional change. The other was this tier system that we're really here to talk about tonight. And so I'll walk you through the tiers. Imagine the state of Vermont with just 3 colors painted on it. The first color is the tier 1 areas, and those are around our downtowns and villages. These are areas that we are planning to do development in, where development is actually one of the main purposes of those areas. In tier 1 areas, we are looking to minimize or even eliminate Act 250 review. And so through the regional plan adoption process, which will identify a whole host of tier 1 areas, and through separate municipalities applying, we will be designating a whole host of tier 1 areas largely centered on our existing downtowns and villages. On the flip side, there's another location-based jurisdictional change, which is Tier 3, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. And Tier 3 is the opposite. Tier 3 are places that are some of the most sensitive natural resources in the state, where most development would require an Act 250 permit. Not just the 10 units of new housing, not just a 10-lot subdivision, but potentially just a single unit home, if it's in that particular Tier 3 area. And then the last color to paint the state with are the Tier 2 areas. That's going to be the bulk of the state. And that's largely jurisdiction under Act 250 as we know it today, with the addition of this road construction provision that I mentioned. Both Tier 1 and Tier 3 are likely going to be very small slices of the state, with Tier 2 occupying the bulk of the state. But what we're here to talk about tonight is actually the Tier 3 areas. So we are doing rulemaking. The legislature gave this board the responsibility to come up with the rules surrounding the Tier 3 areas, where they are, what types of development should trigger the need for an Act 250 permit within those areas. But right off the bat, it's really important for you all to know that Tier 3 areas are they're not prohibitions on development. These are not no development zones. These are areas where design is important and review is necessary to make sure that that design respects the resource that is very sensitive. So I think a lot of folks across the state were had a lot of anxiety about Tier 3, worrying that their entire town or most of it was going to be painted as Tier 3, and every project in their town was going to have to go through an Act 250 permitting process. So that's not the case. I'll show you the maps of what we're thinking about. But it's also not the case that those areas would be a prohibition on development. It's simply an area where permitting is needed. So how do we figure out how did we figure out where these areas should be? The legislature gave us 6 resource areas that we had to consider. Those are on the left side of this slide: river corridors, headwater streams, and the like. But it encouraged us to look at any other sensitive natural resources. So we formed a working group with the help of the Agency of Natural Resources. We have about 25 members on that working group that span from Fish and Wildlife, Forest Parks and Recreation, Department of Environmental Conservation, water quality, but also ecologists, consultants that work for landowners that go through the application process. We also have representation from the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, the Ski Areas Association, a couple of environmental groups. So we have a whole host of people on the working group that we talk to about which areas to include or not include in Tier 3. Through our conversations and some of the criteria we built up, we identified the 5 that you see highlighted on this screen as the areas that make the most sense for designation as Tier 3. And I'll explain a little bit about why we kicked out so many others. So one of our criteria for whether a resource area should be Tier 3 had to do with whether there was already a permitting process at the state level that was adequately covering that resource. So wetlands is a really good example. A lot of folks are familiar with wetlands. The permitting to do development in them is difficult. It's not an easy yes. And it was felt that Tier 3 areas for Act 250 did not need to cover wetlands because they were adequately protected through the A&R permitting program. River corridors, the first item you see on this slide, similar. The same year that the Act 250 reform legislation passed, the Flood Safety Act passed. And that calls on the Agency of Natural Resources to stand up a new statewide river corridor permitting system so that any development happening in those sensitive river corridors will need to go to A&R for a permit. That's expected to be operational by 2028. And so our group talked about it and said, we know river corridors are important and we know flood hazard areas are too, but we also know that this new program is coming and it doesn't make sense to have duplicative state permitting processes. So we're going to exclude those from the Tier 3 areas. Interior forest blocks was another one. And in that sense, one of our criteria for deciding what should be Tier 3 was it needs to be an area that is precise and relatively well defined across the state. It can't be a resource area that covers 70% of the state. And this is a forested state. Interior forest areas, as they're mapped by Vermont Fish and Wildlife, do cover 70+% of the state. And so we looked at that and said, that's not an appropriate, that's an overreach on the part of Act 250 permitting and review for jurisdiction. Let's drill down. Let's try to be more specific. Furthermore, the road construction provision that I mentioned, which is a new layer for jurisdiction, does effectively cover those areas, because any development that's more than 800 feet into the woods, so to speak, building an access into the woods, will be jurisdictional because of the road construction provision. So we left interior forest blocks off the table for tier 3. And then there were some resources that just either had bad mapping or incomplete mapping. So when I started this as a former wildlife person, I thought, hey, rare, threatened, and endangered species locations, those should be tier 3. That seems like would make sense. Turns out we have a pretty poor understanding of where all of those critters are, the rare, threatened, and endangered ones anyways. And the mapping is very incomplete and sometimes dated. And so maybe someday we could add that as a tier 3 resource, but it's not right today. So we excluded it. Those are just some of the examples. Like I said, on the last side, we had about 17 resource areas we looked at. We selected 5, a couple of which are sort of nested amongst each other. So we winnowed the field a fair amount. These are the 3 that we ended up with. Significant natural communities, headwater stream areas, and habitat connectors. In the prior slide with the yellow highlighting of the 5 resources, a couple of them nest underneath the headwater stream areas. That's why you're seeing 3 instead of 5 in this slide. I'll explain each of these, but this is sort of where we landed. So significant natural communities are actual on the ground, boots on the ground delineated areas by Vermont Fish and Wildlife. They're on both public and private lands with the permission of a landowner, of course. And they represent a distinct ecological type that repeats across the landscape. Essentially, all of the natural areas in Vermont are in represent some sort of natural community. But what Vermont Fish and Wildlife does is they pluck out just the most significant ones, the ones that are very representative of that type, and then they rank it on just how rare it is in the state. For the purposes of this tier 3 exercise, they recommended that we include only the very rare and rare significant natural community types across the state. They represent a very small slice of the state, but Fish and Wildlife feels that they have a pretty good handle on the universe of them. So the mapping is pretty complete. And that's why we decided to include them as a tier 3 area. We did winnow the field a bit though, because as I mentioned, wetland areas have their own forms of protection, and probably half of the significant natural communities mapped are wetland types. So we excluded those and just focused on the non-wetland types in the most rare categories. The headwater streams tier 3 area was an interesting exercise in how to focus. So a headwater stream, just generally speaking, are those streams at the top of a watershed, streams that are sort of the first collection of drainage, where not a whole lot of other streams are draining into them. So we talk about first order streams, there's nothing draining into it. Second order streams, there's one other stream draining into it, all the way down the line. So the Agency of Natural Resources helped us with our initial mapping and said, headwater streams, per current definitions, represent about 90% of the state. That wasn't gonna work as a tier 3 area. So we thought about, is there a way to identify just the most sensitive areas within those headwater stream drainage areas? And what we did was we intersected slopes greater than 35%, the steepest slopes out there, soils from USDA soil mapping that have terrible infiltration. When it rains, water doesn't go into the soil, it just runs right off, as well as elevation. So, gravity matters. And so the higher you are up in the watershed, the more impact that runoff is going to have as it goes downstream. So we looked at elevations above 1,200 feet. And by intersecting all of those facets, we were able to shrink the coverage for the headwater stream sensitive areas down to just 2% of the state. Finally, we wanted to include habitat connectors. Habitat connectors are exactly what they sound like. They're important for typically forested areas that allow wildlife and plants to move between larger blocks of habitat. Without them, wildlife and plant species would be isolated, and over time that can lead to local level extirpation of a species and just bad genetic flow in order to deal with the changes and evolution. So we wanted to focus on habitat connectors through the Vermont Conservation Design Project. The Vermont Fish and Wildlife has mapped these areas. That's what you're seeing on the left. You're seeing the highest priority and the priority connectivity blocks across the state. These are areas that are not just important within Vermont, but actually connect the whole northern forest. Vermont is very much a linchpin in the connectivity across the northern forest, from the Adirondacks to the White Mountains to the forests of northern Maine and southern Quebec. We are the connection that allows that to happen through to the Adirondacks. And so these are the most important areas according to Vermont Fish and Wildlife. But again, they cover far too much of the state for everything to need an Act 250 permit in those orange and yellow areas. So we worked with them to focus on the areas that are the most sensitive associated with roads. Typically, roads bisect these habitat blocks, and it's really important that along those roads there are areas where vegetation comes to the edge of the road that allows species to move across those roads. So we looked at just the highest priority areas in orange. We looked at roads that went through those areas, and where those roads bisected different blocks, we established these connectors with a certain buffer off of the road. We were able to get the mapping down to about 6% of the Vermont. There's a little bit of a range there. The note at the bottom right of this slide is worth pointing out. That's why I put it there, of course. Habitat connectors don't do any good if all of the core habitat that they are connecting to has been developed and doesn't exist anymore. So, an obvious question is, if we protect the connectors near critical road segments, what about the rest? And that's where this road construction jurisdictional provision I mentioned before, that's intended to help ensure there's review in the interior forest, comes in. We didn't feel like Tier 3 needed to go there because that new rule ensures that development in the deep woods is going to come through Act 250 anyways. So by focusing on these most sensitive areas, we were able to bring, in this draft, the Tier 3 areas down to between 4.5% and 8.8% of Vermont's land area. A good chunk of this is already on public lands. So we'll be providing a breakdown by county of the land area that's in Tier 3, how much of that is on public land, how much of that is on private land later, so that you can see that. But anyways, that's where we landed. You can see the breakdown by the 3 component resource areas, how much they represent. And the real wild card in this right now is the habitat connectors, because, as I mentioned, we're buffering off of critical road segments, and we're not sure what distance to use yet. Because the road rule, the road construction jurisdiction talks about 800 and 2,000 feet. Those are the 2 options that we have in this draft right now to consider. But we're looking for feedback on that, and we'll massage that and finalize it as we go forward. One way that we want to make sure we don't shoot ourselves in the foot is to ensure that the areas that are intended to be for potential Tier 1, so those are our areas where we want to see growth and development near our downtowns and villages, aren't hamstrung by some overlapping Tier 3 resource area that snuck in there. So in this draft, we're proposing to exclude Tier 3 from all of the future land use types that represent those sort of centers and neighborhood areas, both existing and future. More to say about that. Happy to take questions later. But each of the regional planning commissions, including the one here, Northern Vermont, are mapping these future land use areas for each municipality and making sure that each municipality has some area that is identified for growth. So I will not bore you with the draft rule. I will tell you it's only 5 pages, so you can read it. And I wrote it, not our attorney. They haven't gotten their hands on it yet. So it sort of reads like regular speak. It does have these sections. And I'm going to give you a few highlights from it without showing it to you, but it's available on our Tier 3 website. And I would encourage you later, on the weekend or after this meeting, to take a look at it. As I said, it's just 5 pages. It's an easy thing to walk through. Here are some of the highlights. Like I said, there are a bunch of resource areas that some folks might logically think should be identified as Tier 3 and should require Act 250 review that we are not recommending. And as a part of our report to the legislature, as we codify this rule, we will be detailing those and explaining our rationale. I mentioned several of them earlier. It's important to note that this rule will evolve over the years. So while we need to get it to a final form, and we need your help to do that, I very much foresee 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road, looking back and updating this rule as mapping from the Agency of Natural Resources improves, and as other protection measures might come into existence that might make sense for the Tier 3 areas to change. So this will be a living sort of thing, but we are going to fix it in time through this rulemaking process and then look at it again at a later date. Oh, also, an important highlight that's in the rules, you'll see it in the draft. We understand that statewide mapping is not always accurate, and that at the parcel level, which is where people live, mapping at the statewide level might need some correction. So we've incorporated a provision in the rule that allows for that to happen, sort of 2 tiers of it, where if it's an obvious, very simple, easy to see problem, like you said I'm in a Tier 3 area because it's a significant natural community, but you can see on the aerial photo that that forested area is over here, and what you're calling, where I want to develop is a parking lot. Like that can't possibly be right. Those sorts of easy errors can be corrected just with a landowner or an applicant making that known to our district coordinator. And then the more complicated ones that require some professional judgment, where the rule anticipates having that information provided, by a qualified professional, whether it's an engineer or what have you. So there is this option for sort of site-specific correction. Another highlight of the rule, Act 250, as you saw in one of the early slides, does have jurisdiction over larger subdivisions as well as the substantial development. Within Tier 3 areas, we wanted to keep it focused on just development, not subdivision. So in this draft of the rules, there's no permit required to subdivide your land, even if your land does contain Tier 3 areas. Instead, we want to make sure that there's essentially a notice, we call it a jurisdictional opinion, on record that just advises people in the municipal land records that, hey, this subdivision involves Tier 3 areas, and if there's development on them in the future, you might need a permit. But the act of subdividing under this draft would not require an Act 250 permit, only the actual development itself. Also, some folks who are schooled in Act 250 understand that jurisdiction attaches generally to the entire parcel, even if you're only developing a piece of that parcel. That can be frustrating for folks at times. And it also attaches forever, which can also be frustrating at times. Within the Tier 3 areas, we want the jurisdiction to work differently. We want that jurisdiction only to apply to the impact in that Tier 3 area. So for example, if you have a 40-acre parcel and there's a steep slope that's identified as a Tier 3 area up in the back corner, and you're developing along the road, not in the Tier 3 area, well, then the fact that there is some in your property doesn't matter. You're not in it, so there's no jurisdiction. You don't need a permit. The other example would be, okay, maybe there's a habitat corridor identified along your road frontage, and you would like to put in a few lots. And one of the prime building sites is in that habitat corridor. So it is going to be jurisdictional. You are going to need an Act 250 permit, But let's say the other 2 or 3 lots that you're building further away on your property are outside of the tier 3 area. Under this provision in this draft, only that one lot, only the one that has the impact would be part of the Act 250 permit, not the rest of the project. So this is a different protocol than how Act 250 has worked in the past, trying to keep it limited to just the tier 3 impact itself. We're going to bring all of the exemptions that exist today with us into the tier 3 areas. There's lots of exemptions to Act 250 in statute. It's been a bit of a political football for the 55 years it's been in existence. And even though these are the most sensitive areas, our attorneys tell us that legally under the law, we have to honor those exemptions that exist in statute today. In addition to, and so those include farming, forestry. Right now, there's an exemption for accessory dwelling units. So those exemptions that are built into Act 250 will also apply in tier 3 areas. We also are proposing tier 3 specific exemptions. So for example, we do not want anyone who's putting an addition on their house to trigger the need for an Act 250 permit because their house happens to be close to or in a tier 3 area. Similarly, you have a driveway or maybe a road, a private road that serves your neighborhood, and you need to expand it. Perhaps you need to put in some better stormwater treatment because of the flooding that happened, and you've got to do better swales. You need to have some runouts. We do not want projects that are within 50 feet of an existing transportation piece of infrastructure to have to get an Act 250 permit. So that'll be an exemption, at least it is in the current draft. Another one has to do with wastewater, right? Septic systems fail. It's just a fact of life. It's awful, but it happens. And it's going to happen at some times. That's the only place someone can put their septic system, their replacement system for their existing home, happens to be in a tier 3 area. We felt that was too important to have to go through an Act 250 permit process for, and there's already an A&R wastewater permitting process for those septic systems. So construction of a wastewater system to serve an existing dwelling in a tier 3 area would not require an Act 250 permit. So those are some of the permitting exemptions that we've written into this draft of the rule. We acknowledge that there's some areas that need a lot more work. And so one of those areas are these habitat connectors along roads. And I'll show you on the next slide a little bit of what I mean about overreach in the buffering that we did, the analysis. Trails are another example. We've heard from a number of trails groups in the last couple of weeks that have said, you know, we're really interested. We want to sit down with you. Because trails are sort of a special animal in the developing world. They're not the same as a subdivision of 6 homes or a commercial business. So right now in the draft, new trails, over 100 feet of new trails would be jurisdictional and require an Act 250 permit. But I am committed to working with the trail groups to making sure that we have a more workable version of that with the right level of exemption for trails. I talked about the tier 1 areas being exclusion. I'm going to move on just so you can see the habitat connector example. So this is in Sheldon, not part of this region, but up in Franklin County. This is an area that's one of those orange on the map of habitat connectors, highest priority habitat blocks on either side of this road. And right in the middle, there's a road segment that Fish and Wildlife identified as having good potential for a corridor because there's remaining vegetation there, forest on either side of the road. So the way we ran the mapping was we took that road segment, we buffered it out to 800 feet, that's the yellow. We buffered it out to 2,000 feet, that's the green. And we said, this could be a jurisdictional area related to that habitat connector. The problem is that our mapping only gets us so far. And you can see in the black arrows where the actual connector is, sort of proximate to where the arrow and the real road crossing is. And then in red, you see the areas that are definitely overreached just because we use the circular buffer. They're across a different road. They're well away from the actual connector area. So there are about 1,000 of these. And so I think I will be spending a lot of time over the next couple of months skinnying these down with the help of Fish and Wildlife and some basic criteria. So we know we have more work to do on this. This will shrink the tier 3 areas associated with habitat connectors substantially. but I can't tell you how much, because we sort of have to do the work to get there. All right, you've listened to me for long enough. Thank you for being patient. The timeline for this work, we're in the middle of it. So I don't want anyone to leave this meeting and think that like by Friday, they have to submit their comments or they won't be heard. Or if you have questions that you have to ask them quickly. We're very much in the middle of this. This is our first draft to show Vermonters. And based on the questions and feedback we get over these couple of weeks and going forward over the next couple of months, we will revise this to create a third draft. We're going to try to put that together in January and then walk that through the rest of the rulemaking process, which will land us in May at another refined version that we will go to public meetings on again. So you will have multiple bites at this apple, and you will have plenty of time over the next couple of months to ping us with questions, give us suggestions, and make your concerns known. Ultimately, this Tier 3 jurisdiction goes into effect December 31st of next year, 2026. So we have sort of a long runway to get there and time to try to get these Tier 3 rules as best as we can. I will tell you that the road construction provision that I mentioned, which is a pretty significant expansion of Act 250 jurisdiction in the state, goes into effect July 1 of next year. So that provision actually starts a bit sooner. I will also tell you that our board has no power to change that provision. We plan on issuing guidance about that road construction provision in January, but it's set in statute. And so we want to help folks understand it. Happy to take questions on it. But any concerns that people have about that, and there have been some concerns expressed at these meetings, you really need to talk to your legislator about those, because it would require a legislative fix on the road construction provision. So let's see, what do I have left? That's it. At the bottom is the specific website for the Tier 3 rulemaking. You can get there if you just go to Act 250. Just do a Google search on Act 250 Vermont. It'll take you to our main page. And on that page, there are resources, one of which I would like to show you. It's a mapping resource. It's very cool. The two things you should really look at after this meeting are the draft rules, just 5 pages, and the Tier 3 map viewer that shows you where these proposed areas actually are. So go to our Act 250 website. You can navigate to our Tier 3 page where those resources are. And please know that Kirsten and I, especially me as the lead board member on the Tier 3 work, are at your disposal. So I will admit I am a bureaucrat, but my phone number is 802-480-1885. It's on our website. You can call me anytime. I'm not going to pick up the phone in the middle of the night, but you can call me, leave a message. I will get back to you. You can email me. It's the standard state email, alex.weinhagen@vermont.gov. Again, on our website, I will respond to you. So please know that although this is a bureaucratic process, that there are real people running it and that we are listening and we want to hear you. And that's why we're here tonight. So I'm going to stop talking. And I think I'm going to stop the share so people online can see us. Okay, we're about where I wanted to be in terms of timing. It's about 6:45. I would like to show you the mapping online, but before I go there, I kind of want to get the conversation started, especially questions are like, wait a minute, I didn't understand what you were talking about. So we'll start in the room. Does anybody have a question? Yes, just tell us what your name is and then go for it.
My name is Patrick Curley. I run the Watershed Association in town. I also am an environmental consultant. Nice to meet you in the flesh, Kirsten.
Yes, it is.
Kirsten, it's really, you've been a great help, so I'm glad to see you're still around. I have a question working with landowners, both publicly and privately. Nick's probably wondering the same thought. This is all good in practice, or in theory. In practice, what it means is there's a lot of land encumbrances. So how are you and the board and A&R going to put out that information at a parcel by parcel level that is accessible to the lay people that don't necessarily know the ins and outs of A&R Atlas, where they can get a very clear picture of, if I'm going to buy this property, what can I do with it before they buy it and figure out the hard way that they shouldn't have built their driveway where they did.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have put their septic there. They're not even anywhere close to being outside of the buffer zones. You know, like that's the thing that I see the most
Yeah,
between, like, there's Vermont's perpetual analysis paralysis and the lack of tangible takeaways that the lay people can pull from that information.
yeah. So, two answers to that question, and thank you for asking it, because one thing I sort of skimmed over was, the law, the reform effort, which is Act 181 from 2024, requires our board to do education to both municipalities and landowners that have these tier 3 areas. These public engagement meetings are sort of the start of that, but we need to do much more. So just in terms of the rulemaking, we will be doing more outreach to municipalities, and we're still figuring out how to reach out directly to landowners that have tier 3 areas on their property. We need to sort of get them.
I think you gotta go through the realtors boards.
Well, so
County Board of Realtors.
yeah, so the Vermont Realtors are on our working group, the tier 3 working group, and so they have been doing outreach to both their membership. But I think that the statutory intent was for us to actually reach out and talk to landowners as well as realtors and municipalities. So I don't know exactly how we're going to do that. Some folks have said, just send a letter to every landowner in the state who has a tier 3 area on their property. And we're going to calculate how many thousands of dollars that would cost and whether we have the budget to do that, or if we have to do it a different way. So that is coming over the next couple of months and through the beginning of next year. But to get to the other part of your question, how do you make sure that a potential buyer of the property, so not someone who owns it now and needs to know about the rulemaking so they can comment, but maybe 2 years from now, the rules in place, they're looking to buy a property. So this tier 3 mapping will be available online at all the online mapping, resources that professionals use, the A&R Atlas online and the like. It'll be on our website. And you're right, we're going to need to continue to work with realtors and the engineers and others in the professional sectors to help make sure their clients understand. Just like people have to understand that if you build in a wetlands and you don't get a permit from the state, it's going to be a problem. And that you ought to get that permit first. Or if you put in a septic system, there's a need for a statewide permit for that. Not everybody knows that, but yeah, so our mission will be to do similar sorts of outreach so people understand that there are these jurisdictional areas that have to be, people have to be aware of, and that they're mapped so you can see them.
Yeah, because just to follow up, as I see, especially in small towns in the Northeast Kingdom, where you might have one full-time administrative clerk, if you're lucky. Like, those folks don't have the capacity to manage the day-to-day operations and stay up to snuff on the changing regulations. And so it's quite a bit of, like, there's lakeshore encroachment, there's shoreline protection acts. Half the towns in our regions have multiple lakes in them, and they don't know that there are those permits out there. And it's not necessarily their fault, because they're just trying to stay above water.
Sure.
With all their long-term existing responsibilities.
Well, so honestly, ultimately, the responsibility for educating folks, for providing a reasonable way for folks to move through a permit process, and for enforcement is on us. It's not on those local communities. We're not going to be asking zoning administrators to administer this program or do our work for us.
Yeah.
Will we be working with zoning administrators to the extent they exist in any municipality so they know that, yes, they should refer people to us? Yes. But ultimately, we're not looking to put a burden on municipal government. It will be our responsibility to make that happen. Yes, over
I
there.
want to follow up Patrick's question. So you said.
Just tell us who you are first.
My name's Frank Cheney. I work for the city of Newport. Nice to see everybody.
Hi, Frank.
So you said that the maps are going to be put out at a certain date. One of the issues that I've seen in other areas is that you said the maps are going to evolve. So what happens is that you have a tendency not to set the planning area as a firm, predictable avenue. If you continue to upgrade the maps, people are purchasing property, making economic development plans, and then you move the bar. Is that what we're looking at here? And is that what you mean by the maps continuing to evolve?
That's a great question. So we talked about this in our working group, and at first we were thinking that the maps could be evolving like in a live way, like Fish and Wildlife does some additional mapping, and then, you know, the next month, boom, there's an update to the tier 3 mapping. We realized that was not going to be tenable. So when I say evolve, I mean over periods of time that involve a public rulemaking process each time that there is an update. So when we finalize this tier 3 map, we're going to dip that map in amber, and it's not going to change until we go through this rulemaking process all over again with public meetings and education and all of that jazz. So that's our plan at the moment, is to not have it be like the wetland maps, for example, that can change, you know, 1 year to the next based on hydrology, and not like, you know, based on someone's delineation.
Now, will that public hearing have to go back to the legislature, or is that your board that will decide?
Yeah, so rulemaking is an interesting beast. It does go back to the legislature, but it goes back to a committee of the legislature, not the full legislature. So when the legislature gave our board the responsibility to craft these tier 3 rules, we will write them. We will interface with the public and get comments and revise them. And we deliver the baked cake to what's called the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. LCAR is the name of it. And their job is to just make sure that we sort of met the statutory intent. Their job is not to sort of second guess all of the work that went into it. So ultimately, it does go back to that committee, and we do want their blessing, but it's not them that's doing the work. It's this process.
Thank you.
Yes,
So
just tell us who you are first.
I'm Representative Mark Higley. I do sit on LCON.
Nice to meet you, Mark. We'll see you next summer.
It is quite a process. We also have public testimony through the LCON process as well. I kind of echo the concerns of some of these. I'm also a lister. I've been for 31 years. I know that the wetlands maps were terrible. A lot of folks in town were considering whether putting in a pond or whatever, well outside the maps that the wetlands showed. But when delineation, when somebody actually came and delineated, whoops, they're inside that. So I'm glad to hear you say that those maps that are initially going to be drafted are going to be in concrete. I guess the one question I got though too is I want to know, it can be an expensive process. I did read your draft report, and you're talking about how GIS mapping can't be 100% and all that. What do you anticipate the process to be for, let's say, just an individual homeowner, whomever, doesn't have a lot of resources to battle trying to get permitted?
Yeah, so I think it's really important for folks to understand that this is a change in terms of what triggers the need for an Act 250 permit, and that under this current draft of the rules, if you have a 10-acre lot that's been in your family for 20 years and you're finally getting around to building on it, maybe you're saving it for your kid, and the place you want to build on it is one of these map tier 3 areas, you're going to need an Act 250 permit for just that one house, right? So that's never been that's generally not the case in Act 250s. In the past, it's been for larger projects. So there are going to be just, regular landowners who are going to be in that process that are not, a developer, not represented by a firm. And we're going to lean heavily on the Kevin Andersons of our organization, the district coordinators, to provide those folks the help they need to fill out the application and to get that project reviewed by the district commission. We've tried in the site-specific correction section of the draft rule to be clear that if there are obvious errors, you don't need to hire an engineer to call those out. If the district coordinator agrees with you, we're done. But there are going to be cases where that landowner may need to hire an engineer and likely would be using an engineer anyway in order to design a water wastewater system. That's generally, at least in my 20 years of working in municipal government in a planning office, dealing with landowners, that's the first thing that people typically need to figure out is where does it perk? Where can I put my septic system? So I don't have a great answer for you except to say that our program is committed to helping people. And I think the way the system works now, sometimes those folks, especially when they're building a new dwelling, are going to have a professional involved in some way that can help them with this as well. I will tell you that it's been over a decade since the board that oversees Act 250, formerly the Natural Resources Board, has updated our just general rules. There's a lot of deferred sort of maintenance, a long list of changes that our organization wants to make the process more efficient, less cumbersome.
Expensive?
And our commitment is that next year, when we finish a lot of this reform work, we're going to dive into that long deferred rulemaking effort. And my hope, I can't speak for Kirsten and the rest of the board, but as one board member, my hope is that's an issue we will tackle as a part of that process, because we are going to be interfacing with more just regular landowners, Jane, John Doe, who are not doing a big subdivision, but are doing, something on their property that happens to be in one of these sensitive areas. And I want that process to be straightforward to them. But in the meantime, we're charged with coming up with these maps and rules around tier 3. So that's where we're at.
So
Yes.
Alex, maybe I'd also add, and it goes back to Patrick's question too, that the board recognizes that it would be very good to have an ombudsperson available to assist the general public, not just with Act 250 issues, but potentially even with questions that come up about appeals of permit decisions. So the board has made a commitment to continue advocating to have such a role, or maybe even more than one, maybe it could be an office staffed with, beyond just local district coordinators, a go-to place that the public could access for a range of assistance. So this is sort of still conceptual, but we've committed that we will continue advocating to have such an office or positions.
And just to qualify that, there's no budget for that. We
Yeah.
would need to come to the legislature and make the case and
No.
request funds, and that's likely the answer we're going to get. So one of the things that we want to lean on are our district coordinators, one of whom's here tonight, and the Agency of Natural Resources. They did get funding for additional staff. I think it's one. To help with this, and they are committed to helping landowners on the front end, especially with regard to the habitat connectors and other resources that their Fish and Wildlife Department are bringing to the fore through the process. I'm going to go in the back, and then we'll come back up front. Go ahead.
Hi there, my name is Tyler Wren. Thanks for doing the presentation. My question is maybe for the next year, before these rules go into effect, and construction or existing stuff that's in these zones, will jurisdictional opinions that someone like him issues in the next year kind of tell you that it's gonna be in the zone, and so you gotta watch out, and if you get construction complete or started before that deadline, is it not jurisdictional? Like, I guess I'm asking about getting kind of grandfathered.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one that our draft doesn't address. So it needs to address that, and it's not something that the working group or the board has really discussed yet. So thank you for the comments, and we need to figure that out. I can answer the first part of your question, and Kevin, you correct me if I'm wrong. If you come in for a jurisdictional opinion on your property, so you go to district court and say, "Who do I want to do? Do I need an Act 250 permit?" That's what a jurisdictional opinion is. They are not going to tell you that there might be some tier 3 area on this that'll be important for you to know about next year. That's not happening right now, in part because we haven't finished with the rulemaking. We don't actually know where these places are yet. But also, our program is just starting to stand up guidance on all these things, and it won't be until we have that guidance that our district coordinators can actually start to do some of that forward thinking, like, hey, you're fine now, but you might want to think about this. So we're a little ways out from that.
So you're saying that if the project is partially constructed on December 31st next year, that you might trigger jurisdiction?
I hope not. I am one of 5 board members that gets to write this rule. I would not be in favor of that being a provision in the rule. I think that it should have, a level of substantial construction having commenced, and therefore there is, no new jurisdiction would attach.
And
But that's
as a
just
second
me.
board member, I would agree with that.
Okay, good. We got 2 out of the 5 that are on that
Completed
wavelength.
construction would be grandfathered in. Is that correct?
Say again?
Completed construction.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think the real question is less about completed construction than it is your first example of I'm partway through, or we got a good question on another forum the other night. What if I have an Act 250 permit? I went and got the Act 250 permit for my development, but I haven't built it yet. And now tier 3 happens and there are these sort of little areas that are sprinkled across my project that I already have a permit for. Is there some additional trigger that I'm gonna bump into? And that was a good question at that meeting. I think the draft rules need to address that as well.
And also rebuilding of the footprint of an existing building in the tier 3 with that.
Yeah, so when you read the draft, one of the exemptions that we've written in is any construction within 50 feet of an existing structure would be exempt. So if you're putting an addition on, if you're rebuilding any of that, even if you're building a separate structure, but it's like a garage, but it's within 50 feet of the footprint of the existing structure, it would be exempt.
But it still has to apply with all the other permits. Couldn't put a garage hanging over the river next to your house if it's 10 feet away from the river, right?
So we're just talking about tier 3 areas. So,
Okay, we'll call it headwater stream then.
right.
Couldn't have a cantilever garage over a headwater stream because it's within 50 feet of your existing.
Let me put it this way. If you have a house and your property's in a tier 3 area, maybe it's not gonna be a headwater because that's a steep slope. You're probably not gonna have a house there, but maybe it's a habitat connector. There are a lot of those in places people would like to build along roads. So let's say your house is smack, near one, and you wanna put a garage on, and the garage is gonna be 20 feet away from your house. So you're in a tier 3 area, your house is in that, you wanna put a garage on, you would be exempt. Even though you're in the tier 3 area, if the garage is within 50 feet of the house, that garage is exempt. Anything within 50 feet is exempt.
So I guess my question, and sorry to take over your next line, but my question then is what stops that from perpetuating over and over and over again in the linear or
Good question.
two-dimensional fashion?
It's tied to a date.
So it has to be pre-existing as of 2026 or whatever.
Yeah, if I remember right, that's how we drafted it. But keep me honest, read the draft and make sure that exemption
Yeah.
reads right to you and let me know if we didn't get it quite right. Yeah, let's come up front and then we'll go online. So folks, online, I should have mentioned this at the front end. We're using Microsoft Teams. You're all here, so you figured it out. Hooray. If you want to speak, there's a raise hand function. Looks like a little hand. Just click on that and then we'll go to the folks online and one at a time. If you're having trouble with that feature, when we get done with this next question, just unmute yourself and go ahead and say, hey, I have a question, and we'll go that way as well. If you're having any trouble, those of you online, if you found the agenda for this meeting on our tier 3 website, the second page of the agenda has tips for using the online connection, including how to dial in by phone if the damn Teams thing just isn't working for you. You can dial in by phone as well. So, yes, thanks for being
I
here.
got a question on it too.
Okay, give us your name and what you want to say.
Richard Nelson, representing the town of Derby, a large landowner in multiple tiers, probably tier 1, tier 2, and I suppose we own in tier 3. So my question, I have several questions. First of all, this sounds like a land grab to me. And what are you gonna do to pay the taxes on people that you put their land in a wildlife corridor? So they don't have to pay best value taxes, which could be a home and the tax rate is way up here. What are we gonna do to abate their taxes? Because now they own a wildlife corridor.
So you want me to speak to that or do you want to keep going?
Well, that's part of it.
Okay.
Next part, how do you expect our rural communities to grow? When the governor has stated we need to grow more houses, to bring more families. Newport can only hold so many. And I'd like to fill it, Mayor. Absolutely stand 100% behind you and wanting to fill it and fix it. Derby can hold so many houses. Irisburg has room to grow. Albany has room to grow. These small communities need to grow. We're losing our small communities. What does this do to help our small communities and our small schools and our small businesses in these communities? I have a lot of concerns about this, and I have a lot of concerns about this. Well, I have concerns for forest-based businesses building out where the forest is. Why do we want to build? We don't need a sawmill up here on top of the corner. We need a sawmill out in Canaan or down in Randolph or someplace like that. And not in town, but out where the trees are. So these are all concerns I have. What are we gonna do to address them? What are we gonna do to expedite the process? So it doesn't take someone 2 years and 50,000 or 100,000 or 500,000, or in one case, $2 million to complete a project that makes sense. That's where I'm at.
These are all great concerns. We've heard them in other meetings as well, especially the first one. I'm happy to speak to them, but I don't need to if you don't want me to. I'm happy to just hear them.
I'd like to hear, is anyone on the land use resource board? Are they large landowners? Do they live out in a rural landscape where they're trying to make a living?
Yeah, well, that's an easy question to answer. I'm gonna think about each of us. Unless you know something I don't, Kirsten, I don't believe any of the 5 of us are large landowners with regard to, like, what's your definition of large? How many acres?
6,000.
50.
Well, that gets you there close, but no.
40?
Someone owns a dairy farm that has 125 acres and it's
Okay.
a hill farm and it's gone the wayside.
Yeah, we'll use 125 acres. I don't think any of us own 125 acres. So
Not me.
the answer to that question is no. But I will tell you that when the legislature passed Act 181, part of the requirement was that every board member had to be from a different county. So there's geographic representation across the state. I can also tell you, might not make you feel any better, but 3 of us are planners who worked in communities that did have large landowners, and we worked directly with those large landowners on their plans to develop their property. So we do have some expertise. Kirsten was a district coordinator in the Act 250 program for many years and worked with plenty of large landowners in this part of the state, specific to the Act 250 program. So while we're not landowners in that sense, I think we all have a level of understanding about what you're talking about on that front. But to your first question, what are we going to do about valuation? The short answer is nothing. Act 181 did not lay out a process by which, the areas that got mapped as tier 3 somehow created some new use value appraisal program of its own. A longer answer is that these are the most sensitive natural resource areas of the state. There aren't a lot of them. They occupy a pretty small area, and they're somewhat similar to other areas like wetlands or neutral soils that are good for farming, in that there's a value. The state has placed a value on them, and we have regulations that revolve around them. But they are not a no-go zone. right? It's not as if you have this mapped and therefore your property is no longer developable. It is, you have this mapped, if you can't avoid it, if you have to develop in it, then there's a permit process. And so we work through that to get to yes. But to your other question of what are we gonna do about the process, so it's more approachable to get that permit, more straightforward, faster, less expensive. That's what I talked about, in terms of at least, our commitment, the two of us here tonight, to work on that, in the coming year or two with our rule revisions and continued evolution of the program. Not a great answer for you. I don't have a quick and easy, like, that's how we're gonna fix that.
I understand, hey, we're all appreciative of the tier 1A and 1B.
Yep,
And being streamlined.
yep,
That's great. And I urge the town of Derby to sit down and look at their maps hard and get their tier 1A and 1B zones figured out and get them approved.
yep.
And that's what we need to do in Derby.
Yeah.
I hope the other communities up here that are our neighbors have done the same thing, but I don't know.
Thank you. Let's look and see if anybody online has a hand up. It looks like we have one.
Casey Talbot.
Casey, go ahead and unmute yourself and, tell us what you think.
Hi, I'm Casey. I'm from Newark, which probably Kirsten's the only one that knows where that is. And I also work here at the town office as an assistant town clerk. I've been involved with some of these review board discussions through our planning commission. And I have a couple of, I think, easy to answer questions and then a couple of concerns. So one of the first questions I had is, I think on one of the slides, you had something that said that would be an exemption is called an accessory dwelling. If you could define what an accessory dwelling might be. And my other question that would be an easy one is, would municipalities be restricted by right-of-way cuttings if their roadways have been designated as the wildlife corridors? And also, would hunting and trapping be restricted on these areas that have these wildlife corridors on folks' private properties? My other question, because I noticed there was 3 major veins through Newark identified as the wildlife corridors on basically our 3 main roads in town. How is that overburden or over designation going to be looked at? Is that on a county level or on an individual town level? And then I think my other question was, what kind of a financial burden is it to just a regular property owner that's going to need to do these Act 250 permits to just, build your 21-year-old a house on the property you've been paying taxes on for 35 years that didn't need a permit before and will now because of the wildlife habitat?
Those are all great and numerous, so I'm gonna fumble my way through them really quick. And you just remind me when I forget one. So accessory dwelling units are defined in state statute as a dwelling unit that is either in or next to a single unit home, a single family home. And that exemption was written in, it's a temporary exemption, I think through 2028. That Act 250 permitting is not necessary for those kind of accessory dwelling units. So that's what those are.
The size is limited to.
Yes, the size of an accessory dwelling unit, the limits on that are outlined in state statute with some flexibility for municipalities to go larger. And look at that. I forgot your second question.
Hunting and trapping.
Okay, that wasn't the second
That's the
question.
third.
Right away clear.
Yeah.
Okay, right away clear. So, Casey, you just keep me honest if we forget any of yours. Right, so the exemption that's built into this draft, it says that any construction within 50 feet, any transportation related construction within 50 feet of an existing road or driveway or what have you would be exempt. So if the municipality is doing additional clearing in the right of way to have, better sight lines and wall zones and all of that, as long as it's within 50 feet of the edge of the improved surface of the road, not the pavement, but like the edge of the shoulder, within 50 feet, it would be exempt. You asked about hunting and trapping, within these, habitat connector areas and tier 3 areas. Yeah, Act 250 does not regulate hunting and trapping, and so would have nothing to do with that. It would have no impact on that use. You had a couple others, Casey, one that was easy and
Sort of balancing out, you know, the extent of land that's designated in Newark. She mentioned 3 veins and like,
Oh, right,
you know,
right,
is it going to be balanced by
Right.
county or town?
So I showed you a slide that showed you how those habitat connectors are just a simple circular buffer on these important little road segments. And that doesn't do a very good job of capturing the actual connector. It includes a lot of overreach. So those corrections are going to be happening like on a very fine scale. Each of these road segments that we show as a connector are going to need to be reshaped and skinnied up to reflect the actual area. So it's not going to happen on a county level. It's going to literally happen on a, you know, road segment level through our mapping and GIS work.
But Casey, was your question more about balancing the benefits and burdens to make it equitable on a county or town basis? Was that more your question?
Yes and no. I was wondering if they're looking at, because they said they didn't want to overburden a community by having an over designation, like everybody has to go live in Newport, but nobody can build anything in Newark. Is it going to be looked at by a particular town? Because I mean, obviously rural areas like Newark and Sutton and East Haven, the ununified Gores, places like that. Obviously there's not a lot of us living there, but we do live here. And we currently live here. So I just want to make sure that we're not just going to, you know, only conserve the most rural areas, like the gentleman that talked about the rural areas do need to be allowed to have development. Newark, when I sat in on the planning commission meeting, we don't even qualify for a hamlet for the quote center of our town. Where people are going to build homes, where they are going to make a place for the next generation to be, is already off on these little veins on our little roads, because that's what we have.
Yep.
And I just want to make sure that that stays protected.
So I'm gonna give you an answer and then admit that it's not great yet. Sorry. So the statute requires us to ensure that regions and municipalities are not disproportionately impacted by these tier 3 areas. So we have to figure out a way to be equitable in the distribution of them. However, Mother Nature doesn't give a damn about what the legislature wrote in statute, right? Mother Nature is not equitable in the way resource areas are distributed across the landscape. And we have to recognize that. If we're going to call out the steepest slopes, for example, as being a tier 3 sensitive area because of the potential to create flooding downstream in major storm events, we are necessarily going to be focusing on portions of the state that have steeper slopes and not on other municipalities that are flat as a pancake. So we're going to do the best we can to meet the statutory intent and not disproportionately impact municipalities or regions. But I think we all have to, you know, take that with a grain of salt, that to some extent, you know, we can only do so much within the actual landscape constraints themselves. So one of the things that we're going to be doing to help you understand whether we're doing a good job with that is, again, what I mentioned, a breakdown of how much tier 3 area there is by county across the state, and then dividing that up, subdividing that up into how much of that is in public ownership or easements already, so that there's not likely to be much development there, and how much is in private ownership. And I'm hopeful that when we do that, we're talking about a very small slice of the state. I'm hopeful that the impacts will be small on any municipality, but we'll get a better sense of whether there are some disproportionate levels of that once we do that breakdown.
I think my other question revolved around what, you know, I've never had to fill out an Act 250 permit because my property didn't require one prior. It will most likely under this tier 3 designation. what kind of a financial burden is that to just the regular person wanting to, like I said, build a small home for our son on our property?
That's a great question. And I may have to lean on my colleague here, but there's no like set number. I can't tell you that like, yes, to go through to get an Act 250 permit for a minor application, to do what you're talking about is $300. I can't tell you that. It depends on the nature of the land and where you're looking to develop and what constraints have to be worked around. But Kirsten, can you help?
Well, yeah, sure. So Casey, typically, applicants pursuing a permit for, say, single lot or single home would start with, as Alex had mentioned earlier, you looking at the site plan that would often be drawn up for a wastewater design. And sometimes additional information would need to be added, like the full extent of a driveway. If you're alongside a wetland, you may need to get the wetland delineated. So that's kind of a starting point, and that's obviously an expense, but one that people would otherwise typically be incurring as part of wastewater design work. And then there is currently, an Act 250 permit application fee that's based on construction cost. So, you make known what the estimated cost of construction is, and then it's a percentage fee. That's the current fee structure. It's right around 0.75%. So it does add up. I think our fees get revisited. We periodically reevaluate fees, and there's an opportunity for a per lot fee that sometimes occurs too with these small lot subdivision type projects. That's at a lower rate. So
Casey, it sounds like what might be helpful for you and others, because this question has come up before, is for us to just give an example. A real example of like, here's a single lot development. It was one house. It happened to be an Act 250. And this is what the actual permit application fee was. And this is some kind of an estimate of what additional costs were necessary above and beyond what would have been spent anyway on, for example, a wastewater design. I think we could do that. I hope we could do that, because this question come up, and frankly, other folks in other meetings have said it costs, $10,000 to $20,000 to get an Act 250 permit. And I'm relatively new to the program. I don't know what the right number is. I don't think that is the right number, but
It's more.
yeah, I think it very much depends on the project, and the kind of project that you're talking about, Casey, is a whole world different than the larger projects where very large sums of money are needed for engineering.
Yeah, and so Kevin Anderson, I'm the district coordinator in the Kingdom. Anyone is welcome to contact me, and I can find examples to help you cost out the process. What we have is, we'll know what the application fee is, but we're not going to know how much it costs to pay a consultant to design a wastewater system and so forth. Okay. So, and we have a database online. It's really easy to see similar projects, and you can track that information down for yourself as well. But I'm definitely available to help do that too.
I think my
Casey,
last.
if it's all right, we have a bunch of other hands up in the room. Is that okay?
I just wanted to ask how an individual can follow this process. You said you wanted to talk to individual parcel owners about relooking at the maps and the designations. How do we contact you to say, yes, I want to talk to you about that?
Yes, so call me, better yet, email me. Contact information is on the Act 250 webpage, specifically the Tier 3 page. My contact information is there. And what I'm doing is every single person who contacts me goes on an email distribution list that I use just for Tier 3 communication. So people who are interested are hearing what's the next phase. I'm trying to do monthly updates so people on that list understand like where we are and what the next step is in the process. So yeah, just call me or email me, and if you're willing, that's one way. The other way is to just, take a look at our website every so often, and there will be updates posted there. So
yeah, there's a dedicated webpage for this Tier 3 work.
Yeah.
And that's a great, just follow that too.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
so we have many hands in the room, so thanks, Casey. Let's find somebody who hasn't spoken yet. Yes, right here.
Senator Russ Siggles. Casey, I know where Newark is, by the way. So thank you for calling in.
The gun shop's there too.
Yeah.
Gun shop.
So back to the scenario where the 10 acres is, category 3, where you're gonna have to apply for an Act 250 permit. Is it a full review of Act 250, just like if you were putting in a shopping mall, the same type of review that goes in?
That's a great question. So, yes and no. How's that? Yes, all 10 criteria will be reviewed. No, for many of these smaller projects, most of those criteria, or many at least, are not applicable. So big development, potential impact on traffic, right? You gotta hire a traffic consultant, they do a study, they look at what intersection degradation is gonna happen. Somebody building a single home in a tier 3 area on a rural road is not going to need a traffic study. The traffic impacts are negligible, that's an NA. Similarly,
What about if the neighbor demands that there be a traffic study? I mean, it comes through the appeal process. My whole thing is that this house could never be built through the appeals process that's allowed over and over and over again, and your neighbors might dictate to whether you actually build that house or not.
yeah, so it's a valid concern. Our program has certain criteria for when things like a traffic analysis is necessary, and a neighbor saying that it is not part of that criteria. So it depends on the reality, not the angry NIMBY next door.
Well, but it could be though, I mean, right, because they're on they're on a road that goes out through there, and you get 2 neighbors that complain and said, we just don't like the traffic on here, and so, I mean, we've been involved with enough state stuff to understand on how it goes and how it is, so I won't belittle that, but, or you keep on with that scenario, but it is quite possible in these situations to where the neighbors do dictate to whether those homes get built.
Yeah, and I think it's important for everybody to understand, the legislature has required us to submit a report and recommendations on how to reform the appeals process. Not just with Act 250, but actually we're making recommendations regarding municipal permitting as well and how appeals of that works. So you'll be seeing that soon. And as a part of that process, we've done the analysis. About 360 permits were issued, I think, in 2024. Only 1 was denied, and only 2% of those had any appeal. So as much as appeals grate on all of us, especially when the neighbor is really just looking out for their own interest and there isn't really a larger community interest in mind, they're exceedingly rare.
I think the thing that we have to always be aware about, and things that you folks don't talk about very often, is that you always talk about the amount that is an appeal, but you never know what never got asked for or filed because somebody doesn't want to go through the process.
Yeah, we understand
And that is where it is. The other thing is that I hope that when we put these wildlife corridors in, that we put really big signs on there so all the wildlife know where to go. And so I really do hope that we get that going so that we can get that going real well.
I will take that comment for exactly what you meant it as. Yes.
Direct the bears to our cornfield.
No, I know, we gotta make sure, they know where to go.
Let's go to the back. Tell us your name.
My name is Tina LeBond. I'm a realtor. I got my license in 1979 and you go and say, I'm a Vermont, I do what I want. But Act 250 was in when I started and we've seen lots of different things morphing and changing. But at the risk of sounding like I'm devaluing all the work, it seems like they're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist.
Well, let me be clear. We're trying to solve an issue that the legislature told us we needed to address.
But in very
So-
plain English, what is that problem?
So here, I can tell you, good question.
Like just lay out the
Yeah,
problem
so
exactly.
the problem that the legislature was seeking to address is that Act 250 did a great job with big projects, right? Projects that were on the side of ski mountains with 50 homes in them, where back in 1970, sewage was flowing down the hillside, right? That's why Act 250 was created. Does a good job with big projects. But all of the small projects that don't require an Act 250 permit, the 3-lot subdivision out in the middle of the woods.
So clarify this for me. Does tier 3 mean any town without zoning is automatically tier 3?
No,
Okay.
no.
Because we've gotten on the board of realtors, we've gotten several emails that say tier 3 equals towns with no zoning.
Right, that's not correct. Tier 3 are the most sensitive natural resource areas across the state, wherever they are. It has nothing to do with what the zoning is for that particular town. But to answer your original question, because I think it's a good one, like, what is the problem that this is seeking to solve? The problem is death by 1,000 cuts. 3-lot subdivisions, little development here and there all over the landscape, fragmenting the resources and essentially negatively impacting wildlife habitat, the ability to withstand major storms, flood events, all of those things. We're suffering death by 1,000 cuts.
Alex, can I give a little?
Well, let me just finish
Sure.
and then, sure. And so the idea is that if we make sure that the most sensitive areas that contribute to flooding, the most sensitive areas where wildlife like needs those places to be able to exist over the long term, then we can solve that death by 1,000 cuts and make sure the review is targeted to just the areas it needs to be. So that's the problem, and that's how we're trying to solve it. But again, this reform effort was almost a decade in the making. It was adopted by the legislature over the governor's veto. Our board is not in charge of writing this law. Our board was established to implement it in the most practical and reasonable way we can. And that's really why I want to hear from all you tonight, because I'm trying real hard. Our whole board is trying real hard to make this as prescribed and limited as possible. You're going to have good ideas to help us, make sure that that's true and that we're still meeting the intent. Is it okay if we go further?
Sure.
Just, I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to talk. So yes, in the back. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Simon, nice to meet you, Simon.
Nice to meet you. You're tier 3 with the animal and the preservation. And you're also claiming the growth of wood from the fruit of across the road. That's, I believe that's how you guys are talking.
Okay, yeah.
Is there any more room to be changed or reevaluate as to what they want to implement in that specific? Or it's already set in stone?
No, that's a great question. So the legislature gave us full authority to craft these rules as we see fit, as long as it fits the statutory intent. So where these areas are, how big they are, and what kinds of exemptions we integrate into the rules for development in those areas, it's all up for grabs. So we get to make this.
Who's the god that sets these parameters? Those yet?
It's the 5 land use review board members with your help. That's why we're here tonight. Say again?
That's why I'm asking, is it still open? It's already black and white. We're wasting our time talking or not?
No, so we've worked for the last 6 months to think about what's the right way to tackle this and to try to put together a draft that's intelligible, that you can understand and comment.
Preserving that, okay, to a certain limit, because that don't bring you no tax income anywhere in the state. Anyway.
Yeah.
Because it's anti-growth. Growth is housing and people that go spend money.
Right. Well,
The wood don't give you tax money.
to speak to your original question though, this is our first crack at getting public input. And so it's not determined yet. This is a draft and we're looking to change it, to make it better.
Hey, Simon, what they're looking to control, them houses that we see built and we say, who the hell wants to navigate that driveway in the wintertime?
Okay.
And that's part of it.
It is part of it.
It is part of it, and those steeps and, it's like, who thought it was a good idea to put wind turbines on top of Lowell Mountain where it was good habitat? Okay, that's,
There was no question about it then.
yeah.
So
Let's see, do we have anybody online? It looks like we do.
yeah, Jamie Fidel and Nancy, but Patrick's also had his hand up.
Yes, but I don't think we've heard from Jamie or Nancy, and I really want to make sure that everybody's had a chance to talk before we hear from folks multiple times. So let's go to Jamie. What do you have to say, Jamie?
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having the meeting and allowing for remote participation. Just a question for you in regard to the question from Senator Ingalls about whether all the criteria would apply. One idea that was being discussed in the stakeholder group was potentially limiting review to just certain criteria that related to the tier 3 resource. And just wondering if you could share if that idea is potentially still viable, or has the land use review board sort of made a determination on that concept?
Yeah, good question. So, full disclosure, this guy's part of our working group, so he's been thinking about this, since, April. Thank you, Jamie, for, participating.
Yep.
So yes, there was some discussion about whether we could there are 10 Act 250 criteria. I showed you those earlier. Could we say in tier 3 areas, it's just, criteria XYZ? Maybe there's only 3 that are really relevant. Maybe we don't need to talk about aesthetics and traffic impacts, because what we're really focused on are natural resource issues. I think that the working group, the stakeholders, were not of one voice on that. Some thought that was a good idea to limit it, others not. I think the board actually was pretty interested in the idea. But our legal staff explained to us that the way the Act 250 law and the reform law was written, we don't have that flexibility. Tier 3 is about what triggers an Act 250 permit. The actual review criteria that projects that trigger the need for a permit are reviewed under, those are in state statute, and we don't have the power to pick and choose which ones, unless the legislature wants to give us that power. And, the legislature will reconvene in January. But in any case, to answer the question, our legal team says that we don't have the flexibility to tailor review criteria within tier 3 areas.
Maybe if I could, just one quick follow-up to that would be, thanks for that explanation. It's good to know, and maybe perhaps as you report out to the legislature, there'll be a rule, but perhaps that could be a recommendation that you make to the legislature, and perhaps that's an adjustment that could be made.
Yeah, interesting suggestion.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Now we'll go to Nancy. I don't think you've spoken yet. Nancy, you're online. Go ahead and unmute yourself. If you're still there, Nancy, and you can figure out how to unmute yourself. Okay, we will move on. Yes.
So you said that the road.
Tell us who you are, Liam, first.
Sorry, my name's Liam Abate and I'm a planner at NVDA. So you said that the road rule will not apply to lands that are in tier 1 centers and neighborhoods. Will it apply to lands that are in tier 2 centers and neighborhoods? Because that will exist in dozens of communities that don't have zoning or subdivision bylaws.
The road rule specifically, not the tier 3 areas, but the road.
Well, either.
Okay. Okay, so for tier 3, our hope is to exclude areas that are in the 4 future land use types. Downtowns, village centers, planned growth areas, and village areas. So those areas, if there is a tier 3 that weasels its way into those areas, it would be excluded. It wouldn't count, essentially. The road rule is a very different beast. So the road rule does not apply in designated tier 1 areas. But as you said, there are going to be lots of communities in the Northeast Kingdom that aren't going to be able to get a tier 1 status.
38 to be exact.
There you go. You know the number. And in those areas, the road rule will apply, because it will apply to all tier 2 and tier 3 areas.
Thank you.
Anybody who has not yet spoken? Yes, in the back, and then another in the back.
Nick McClure, I'm a realtor as well. I wanted to, poll the audience a little bit. Who feels we need more housing in Northeast Kingdom? Who feels housing in the Northeast Kingdom is affordable? New housing is affordable.
Not a
No, not new housing.
Does the tier 3 restrictions make housing more affordable?
No.
My feeling is we need to foster development. Our economy needs development. You made a comment early on that this was developed in Vermont. We're not New York, we're not New Hampshire. We're the Northeast Kingdom, we're not Chittenden County. And I think that is really an important factor that, you know, we're not dealing with. I guess I've got a question for Kevin. How many major Act 250 developments in the Northeast Kingdom are being constructed now?
You say, you're referring to the major application process?
Right.
We don't have any pending majors.
If you look at Chittenden County, probably dozens of them going on.
I don't know about dozens, there's probably a few more. By majors, these are applications that need a hearing.
Right.
Yeah, there's a few more in the mentioned applicants.
I guess my point being that I think we need to foster development, not further restrictive. I know this is a small segment, but when you add all these small segments together, they add costs, they limit affordability. I think we need to respect property owners' rights. I think we need to be intentful in terms of development and encouraging strategic development. I agree that I love the idea that we're eliminating some restrictions in our downtowns. And a lot of the people that are in the Northeast Kingdom live here because they want to be in the country. So we don't want to, negatively impact the lady in Newark that wants to build a house for her 21-year-old son. So when you add up stormwater, wetlands, primag, Act 250 roads, they all like compound. And when you're looking at a $30,000 septic system, just to comply with the state rules, everything you add just adds costs. And, that's a concern representing property owners.
I would love to respond, Alex.
We're gonna hit, more people haven't talked, and then we'll come back. So, thank you for the comment. I'm not gonna try to answer it. I appreciate the sentiment and thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, George Wagner, excavation. Question on the 1,200-foot rule. How is that gonna, that may rope in a lot of property, especially in Newark.
The 1,200 feet of elevation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's that put us?
Yeah, and it's a way to try to,
No, but I
focus
mean,
on, go ahead.
I can't remember. Can you say, does that
Yeah,
bring
so
you into the tier 3?
That's part of the headwater stream delineation. So headwater streams occupy most of the state, and we wanted to focus in on just the most sensitive portions. So we looked at areas that were above 1,200 feet and had 35% or greater slope and have very poorly infiltrating soils. So you put all those together and you get a very small slice of the state.
Did you
That's-
want to show the map?
Yeah, I can do that.
So it's not necessarily just all property above 1,200.
Oh, no.
You have to meet all the others.
It has to be all of the rest of those, which makes it a very small area, but it is focused in those higher elevation zones. Yeah. Yeah, we are running out of time and I really want to show you the map. So let's do this. I'll get to you. Hold on. How many people would like to say something more? We have just, 12 minutes left. Besides Patrick.
I'm dying over here.
Okay, so there's Patrick and there's one person behind Patrick and I don't see anybody online. So, sir, you behind Patrick, go ahead because you haven't spoken. Then we'll get to that. Hi, John.
Attorney here in the area and City Council of Newport. Just a comment. Years ago, in the district offices, there was a person who members of the public could call, who would fill out a project review sheet and try to guide people through the list of the 50 or 60 state permits that were on the sheet. And depending on the description of the project, would flag the 3 or 5 or 7 or whatever number of permits were most likely to apply to try to give people some guidance. But in recent years, that process seems to have disappeared. And so my comment is essentially that the agency needs to bring it back, number one, and number two, if that requires folks in the legislature to do something, it would behoove them to do it. Be a great help to the average citizen.
I agree 100%. The live people that were a team and resources available statewide have basically been mostly almost completely replaced with like a computer algorithm that is a great tool that people can access 24/7 to generate a report, but it's not the same as having a live person to answer, in some cases, more targeted questions. So that was part of the reason that the board is interested in continuing to advocate for an ombudsman office or service to help meet that need.
We all liked it better when those permit specialists existed. It was a shame when they went away, but it was a cost saving measure. And they introduced a computer-based system to try to replace them, which is now being retired by ANR because it's not doing the job. So we'll see if something better comes.
I'm trying to hear what Patrick has.
Okay, thank you. I want to follow up on Nick. I want to touch on Richard and Russ, what they mentioned. So I agree with most things that Nick said. We do need housing. The caveat is we need to not be dumb about it. And what we did in this state, many others for the past 150 years, is we did what was easy or convenient, which puts development on flat areas which flood, or at the bottom of the steep area which gets eroded away. So in the past 2 years, I have been using a lot of taxpayer dollars to fix fuck-ups that we are living with from 4, 5, 6, 7 decades ago that are now in harm's way because of changes in precipitation and land use. One example, Richard, I'm going to touch upon, it's close to home. I'm working with Missy on her property on Valley Road. She didn't build that house there. No. She didn't put it there. She bought it thinking that it was perfectly acceptable. And then it gets swept away time and time again. Now I'm trying to help her go after taxpayer dollars to get out from under that thing, make that problem go away. Unfortunately, that's taking a housing unit out of the market. But it's also consuming taxpayer dollars to deal with that problem, which could have been avoided had smart development been in use at that time. So we're trying to thread that needle where, yeah, we might spend a little bit more up front to do it right, put it where it should be. But in the long run, we're not burning taxpayer dollars in a state that's only getting older, generating less tax revenue every year, because we can't undo so many things day after day after day.
And as I said, part of the process that created this process was people building homes in those places, and we look up and we're driving.
Yeah.
And we say, how the hell they get there?
Or right next to the brook or right next to the lake, you know?
Exactly. I don't 100% disagree with you, but I appreciate what you said about the cost factor for these homes going in. Yeah. I bitched at Rep Noise every day because that house was hanging over the wild branch on my way to the state house every day. It's finally gone.
Yeah.
Who'd have thought that house would have washed out? Because when I went to UVM in '85, it was a long ways from the wild branch.
Yeah.
It changed quickly all of a sudden, you know?
And I do think that it's not just about homes that are close to rivers and streams that are doing crazy things with our crazy weather now. It's also about that development you were talking about that's way up high. How'd they get up there? How'd they get through those slopes? That level of development that is not at risk in and of itself is contributing to the risk that everybody downstream has to face. And that is part of what this is trying to get at. Not in all of its aspects, but at least in some. Let me show you the map real quick before we run out of time. So.
Good thing Killington got built when it did.
Okay, so if you go to our website, act250.vermont.gov, this is our tier 3 rulemaking page. This page has a lot of the same information that we just talked about, so it's helpful. There's some materials there, but it just scroll down past the meetings that we're in right now and the working group summaries that you can peruse if you want to see what we talked about prior. The draft rule is right here. The presentation I gave tonight is right here, and the map viewer is right here. So I'm going to open that up by going to this link, because I already have.
Will all these wildlife corridors automatically contribute to the 30 by 30 and 50 by 50?
No. Not connected. Not connected. Again, these are not areas that are being conserved. These are areas that require smart design and a review process. So this is what the map looks like when you come in. there's a little box on the right called map layers. That's where you can turn layers on and off. You do have to zoom in a little bit to have things start to appear. But right now, what the default is, it shows the three basic tier 3 areas. Headwater stream areas, those real steep slopes at higher elevation, are in mint green. The significant natural communities are in purple. You can click on the little legend icons over here to actually see what each resource area looks like. And if we zoom in to Newark, if I can find it. So here's Newark. I'll zoom in one more time. Parcel lines will come up. You can click on a parcel and see, who the property owner is. Let me zoom out once. So for Newark, there are some headwater stream steep slope areas in mint green over here in this part of town. There are, it looks like, no significant natural communities that are mapped of the very rare type. And there's an awful lot of these habitat connectors. Those are the areas along these roads that help connect these forest blocks. That's the yellow and the green, yep, along the roads. So if I were to zoom into one of these areas, I don't want to go to Casey's property, I don't know where it is, but if I zoom in, you can see that these habitat connectors, the way Fish and Wildlife has delineated them, has already taken out areas around existing structures, about 150-foot swing of the radius. So those would not be in a tier 3 area, even if the portions of the property around it are. And you see the two options. In yellow is the 800 feet and in green is the 2,000 feet. But we're still trying to decide between. Would love to get your feedback on whether it should be one of those, something different. So that's what they look like. If I zoom out, I want to show you one other thing on the map. We don't have an awful lot of map layers over here, but there are a few that you can turn on and off. Like I can turn the 2,000-foot layer off. This is what it would look like with just 800 feet of habitat connector.
And this is prior to the refinement of the mapping work that
right. This is with all the bumps and warts that need to be fixed that I was talking about in the presentation. But down here, if you scroll down on the map box, the map layer box, there are a bunch of reference areas that are currently off, but you can turn them on and off. And so I'll do that for you. Click on reference areas. So here are those bright orange priority connectivity habitat blocks that Vermont Fish and Wildlife has mapped. And this is why these roads in Newark show some habitat connectors and this road does not, because one side is highest priority and the other side is just priority. And we decided that we were going to exclude that, even though it is habitat, in order to focus in and try to be more prescribed. So these reference areas will give you some sense of that. In red, you're going to see areas that are at or above 2,500 feet in elevation. If I turn this off, you'll notice that the headwater stream areas, the mint green. Come on now, map, work for me. Well, we're going to be in glitch mode. These red areas are high enough elevation that most development is already subject to an Act 250 permit. So we're not extending the tier 3 areas above 2,500 feet because Act 250 is largely already there. Anyway, just wanted to give you a sense for the map. I think it's really important that you help share this out with your networks, with your neighbors, with the people that you work with. If you're a realtor, an engineer, let them look at the map, let them look at their property, and let them, give them the information so that they can be in touch with us and give us direct feedback about, what they think could be improved. And if they just need to ask questions, we're there for that too. I'm there for that. Okay, we are at 7:56, so we can take a couple more comments. Yes.
Just quickly, I think Newark's a great example of the population of Newark is what, 500 people? 1,000 maybe?
300.
It's about 500.
So it's very small. So there's very little development. So to have these forest blocks are already connected, how is this, even if population doubles, is it going to create an issue for these forest blocks I can see where it would, if it's Essex and it's already largely developed and there's only one corridor. But in an area like that, restricting everything that's along a road seems to be unwise.
It's a great comment. That's the kind of feedback that I want to hear, because our working group had similar concerns that we were, the sort of algorithm or mapping technique we were using was identifying large swaths of roads. And our working group said, can't you pinpoint it? Can't you figure out where the most important crossing is and just designate that? And so I want to try to do that. But there are limitations, and your point about the context matters. Like, are you in a forested area or are you in an already fragmented area? That's a really good comment. I don't know exactly how to work with it yet, but I like it. So
Take boots on the ground.
perhaps, yes.
So I have a question about the map. So just to confirm my understanding, you're saying that.
It's Tyler, right?
Yes, sorry, yeah, Tyler.
Yeah, you
yes.
moved, you're confused.
I needed to look closer, yeah. If I'm understanding, you're saying that the maps, you have a general idea, but then it's not specific yet, or there's little adjustments that can be made.
Yes.
But we won't know until later. My concern is I'm in the middle of a project and you're saying you don't know if partial construction will count. I just feel like I'm playing Russian roulette now, you know, I don't know. So if the lines are not delineated accurately yet, and you don't know if partial construction is covered, so it's.
I understand your concern.
Okay, thank you.
Understand where we are. We're just in the middle of drafting the rule.
But it just doesn't seem like the timeline is correct. Like, it seems like there's more to work out and then give us more of a notice.
Well, so again, this is our sort of early draft. We'll be coming back to you early part of next year with the next better refined draft. And there'll be more opportunities for comment. And then we'll be coming back to you for one final round of public comment in May is when we're planning the public hearing. And none of these rules take effect until December 31st of 2026. So I hear what you're saying, and I want to go to our legal team and ask the question you're asking and get you an answer, because I think it's a really important question.
Yeah.
But I think the legislature actually did a good job in giving us a pretty long runway for this to sort of get figured out before it becomes effective. So be in touch with me and I'll try to get you the answer that you're looking for. It's a good question. Okay.
You've got
hey,
one lady.
We're done. So, I'm just gonna cut it off and say, come talk to me after. And anybody who has comments or questions that we didn't get to, we're not done with this yet. So reach out. And our board meets every week. If you want to by, remote connection, come to one of our board meetings.
It's another one of these sessions tomorrow as well, that you can log on remote and.
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
Good point. So if you want to continue the conversation, you can join us in Windsor in person or remote. But I'll stick around and answer additional questions. I just want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to go. So thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Start recording.
So first of all, stop recording and then end the meeting first. Don't just leave.